I want to read one of the Christmas stories for you today. This is from Matthew 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet." This is the words of the prophet. "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd the people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and worship him." When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They knelt down and they worshipped him. And then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. One of the beautiful things about being a non-liturgical church, as we are, is that you have a certain amount of freedom to play with the traditions as the traditions come along. And we are not, as we never are, locked into the traditional Advent and liturgical calendars. This is the first Sunday of Advent, and the beginning of the Advent season that runs for 4 Sundays until Christmas. And then in the liturgical traditions, Christmas actually doesn't begin until Christmas Day and runs for 12 days afterwards. And so you have the 12 days of Christmas. And in those liturgical traditions, Christmas is actually not celebrated until Christmas, and then the Christmas celebration in worship happens for the next couple of weeks. And so Advent is about getting ready for that. And usually, not usually, always, in those liturgical traditions, the story of the wise men is not read until after Christmas. It's one of the last stories in the season of scriptures that lead up to and then follow Christmas. And there's a couple reasons for that, and I'm not going to go into all of them except for the one, and that is that if you listen carefully to that story that I read you, when the wise men came to find Jesus, they came to Herod, and they talked to Herod, and they left Herod, and they followed the star, and they followed the star till they found Jesus. And where did they find Jesus? A house. Not a stable. It says a house. They found him in a house. We, as some of us just did, and we always do, we take those Christmas stories and we all merge them together in our minds. And in our Christmas, if we have a Christmas pageant celebration with kids, we have the shepherds up front and we have the wise men up front all together at the stable. And many of the songs we sing have that, and the cards and everything. We conflate that story together, those stories together. But the tradition always knew what the actual story said about where the wise men found Jesus. And the tradition always assumed that when the wise men came, they found Jesus at home, and that's where they found him. And so if you have the birth story in the manger and then the wise men finding Jesus in a house, that has to come afterwards. And so that's why the wise men story from Matthew always is near the end of the Christmas celebration. Well, We're starting with the wise men. Perhaps we might imagine that the wise men saw that star and they had to set out early on, long before Christmas, to follow the star and then to find Jesus. But the real reason we're doing it is because it fits the theme very well. All during Advent, we are going to be asking this question: what are we waiting for? Because Advent is the season of waiting. In each week, we are going to ask the question in relationship to one of the biblical characters in the Christmas stories, and ask the question of that particular biblical character, what were they waiting for? And just a reminder, as we begin this season of Advent and focus, as we do each year, in some way or another, on the stories of the birth of Jesus. There are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Only 2 of the Gospel stories have actual stories about the birth of Jesus. The Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John do not talk about the birth of Jesus. Only Matthew and Luke tell us about the birth of Jesus. And those 2 stories are very different. Luke tells the story of the shepherds, and Matthew tells the story of the wise men. And both of these stories, the one in Luke and the one in Matthew, are part of the myth of Jesus that grew up around his real life. And what I mean by that is that we really know absolutely nothing about the birth of Jesus and his young life. As the Gospels make fairly clear, if you take out those birth stories, we don't know anything about Jesus until he comes on the scene as a full adult, in his probably early 30s, we assume. But as soon as Jesus becomes significant in the tradition, then you get the stories told that fill in the details that we don't know about his life before and afterwards. And so both Matthew and Luke tell us birth stories of Jesus, and they're different. They're completely different. If you read one different from the other, you would not know you're reading about the same person, because they come out of different traditions, and then they come together in the 4 Gospels. These 2 gospel writers added these stories to kind of situate Jesus in the larger setting of the world, in terms of what was happening in the world, who was ruling the world, and what the time frame was. And that's the significance of why they added these birth stories. The question we're asking today with the wise men is, what were the wise men watching for, and what were they waiting for? And what they were watching for is signs in the heavens that a new king was born. And that's the other thing about the tradition in this story. We usually put crowns on the wise men to make them kings, and the story says nothing about them being kings. It was assumed in the tradition that they were astrologers, and that because they would have been part of the royal entourage from the east who would have been charged with watching the heavens for signs. Because it was believed in ancient lore that if a new star was found, that if there was a comet that crossed the sky, that if there was some other big astronomical event, that was almost certainly associated with some big earthly event. And what they were watching for was a star. And what they were waiting for was someone to worship or something to honor that was worthy of the gifts that they had to bring. Someone to worship or something to honor that was worthy of the gifts that they have to bring. And that's kind of where I want us to go in terms of thinking about the theme for the day. What are we waiting for as we begin this season of Advent and look forward to the celebration of Christmas? What are we waiting for? Sometimes it seems that we are not waiting at all. I mean, given the Christmas shopping creep, that seems to get earlier and earlier each and every year, and then generates the backlash, the boycotts of Walmart and Target, and because they're open on Thanksgiving. So it seems that we don't wait at all. We just go out and we're celebrating Christmas immediately, and we can't wait. And I could go on about that. I could preach about that. And that's not talk. I could preach about that. But I actually want to invite us to think about this issue of gift giving from a slightly different angle. When we were thinking about these themes in the worship planning group, Jan Johnson, after one of our meetings, sent along to our committee an advice column that she had saved that was written by Carolyn Hacks, who was an advice columnist for the Washington Post. And I don't usually read advice columnists, so I would have completely missed this. But it's a good one. A reader wrote to her, and the reader, I would assume, is an older person. The reader was complaining about the lack of gratitude from young people when they received gifts. The reader said they don't say thank you. They don't write thank you notes. They don't do all of the things that when we were young we had to do when we received a gift to show our gratitude for the things that we have received. And so the reader said she was thinking about not sending any gifts anymore, but instead just sending a card. And Carolyn Hacks responds this way. When I was a kid, about 1,700 years ago, it was a very big deal to unwrap a sweater. New clothes were special. See, I have to say now, when I was a kid, which wasn't quite 1,700 years ago, and we opened gifts around the Christmas tree, and I unwrapped a sweater, I was always a little disappointed. Because I guess I was a guy. But anyway. Now, though, she says, even for many who struggle financially, it's a yeah, whatever experience. People can get sweaters or books or knickknacks or any goods within the purchasing power of a gift card at all hours, often without leaving home, sometimes so cheaply that the kids' dog walking money can cover it. As a result, many kids and even adults are immune to their possessions. Despite the recession, Americans are largely staggering under the weight of their stuff. I want the people who love me to show it by supporting my effort to not accumulate more and more and more. If not for my sake, then for the earth's. And so I'm not just saying, yes, by all means, start sending only cards to mark your loved one's special occasions. I'm going to throw it all out there that we'd all do well to give our gift-giving habits a harder look. Specifically, I think it's time to ask ourselves every time, does this thing I'm about to buy have any chance of being important to its recipient? Does it get cash to someone strapped? Free up time for someone busy? Show support or appreciation for someone down? Strengthen connections for someone lonely? Provide a pleasant experience to someone who wants for nothing material? Would this person prefer no gift at all? Is there something only I can give, even just my thoughts, expertise, or time? If I'm not sure, then can I redirect my gift energy into keeping in touch more between birthdays and weddings? Most of us can and should do better at showing gratitude and teaching its value to the current generation, in quotes. But we can also do better at listening to what changing mass behavior tells us, instead of just trying harder to make the old ways stick or escalating the protests when they don't. I think those are great questions. I mean, does this thing have any chance of being important to its recipient? Does it make a difference or meet some genuine need? Is there something only I can give? And, I would add, why are we giving gifts? I mean, why? Why do we know why we're doing it? And when we give a gift, what are we saying with our gift giving? What is that gift saying about us, to that person, about them? What are we saying with our gift giving? How is our gift giving worthy of us, the recipient, and our values? And just as a kind of reality check, what do you remember about the gifts you gave and received last year? Right now, can you think about the gifts you gave and received last year? Do you remember them? Do you think the people you gave them to remember them? These are the questions that we want to invite us to think about this week. And not only this week, but now. Because what we're going to do is that we're going to get up from our places, and if we wish to, and we're each going to have an opportunity to grab some materials over there and make an Advent log. And what we want you to do, and Vicki, you can chime in if I'm missing anything here, because Vicki was part of this planning group, or Jan, is that we want you to come back with your stuff. And the thinking here is that while we can come back together and we can have a conversation about our gift giving. And you'll find when you get over there that there's a little paper that has some of the same questions that I asked that you could take with you, as well as a list of the supplies and what you might do with them. So bring the supplies back together and form some small groups, and then have a conversation about this gift-giving thing. Why do we give the gifts we give? What do we remember about the gifts? What have been the significant gifts that we have received? What really has made a difference? And what gifts that we have we given that we think have really been significant and made a difference? And so in terms of the intergenerational thing, the thinking is that adults and kids who like to play with their hands while we talk can do something with their hands and build, the Advent wreath. And then we can have a little conversation, and once everybody has the stuff together and done what they want to do with the wreath, then we're going to bring one of the wreaths up here, and we're going to light our first Advent candle, and then we will sing our closing song.